Hello, thank you all for coming. I'm Helen Burnham. I'm the Pamela and Peter Voss Curator of Prints and Drawings. And it's my great pleasure tonight to introduce to you Hugo Chapman of the British Museum. But first I would like to thank MFA benefactors Barbara and Burton Stern for their generosity in endowing the Barbara and Burton Stern Lecture Fund. Mr. Chapman joined the Department of Prints and Drawings at the British Museum in 1995, after a decade in the Old Master Drawings Department of Christie's, London. He became the keeper of Prints and Drawings in 2011. The British Museum houses the National Collection of Western Prints and Drawings. This is one of the top 3 collections of its kind in the world, with approximately 50,000 drawings and over 2 million prints dating from the beginning of the 15th century to the present day. As keeper, Mr. Chapman oversees the collection, as well as the staff of the Department of Prints and Drawings, which maintains a very active study room, a regular program of exhibitions, loans, and scholarly research. He was the curator of the 2006 Michelangelo Drawings exhibition entitled Michelangelo Drawings, Closer to the Master. His many publications include 2 insightful and lively books on Michelangelo, along with his most recent catalog, Italian Renaissance Drawings from Fra Angelico to Leonardo. Please join me in welcoming Hugo Chapman to the MFA.
Well, thank you very, very much indeed, and it's a great pleasure and honor to be in Boston. Every time I come to the museum, it's like your kind of kid brother. It seems to have grown larger. And I have to say, looking around the galleries, the wonderful new galleries, the intelligence and the beautiful curation of them says much for the erudition and intelligence of Bostonians. But I'm going to talk to you tonight about Michelangelo, and I'm going to, as far as possible, concentrate on the drawings that are in the show from the Casa Buonarroti currently on, although I will stray and look at drawings from the British Museum from time to time. Now, the drawings in the show, there are 25 of them, and that represents about 5% of Michelangelo's surviving corpus. There are about 600 drawings by Michelangelo that most scholars agree about. What I thought is, in this next hour, is to kind of look at some of the ways to analyze Michelangelo's drawings, to the questions you might ask of them. And I'm aware that some of you probably know much more about Michelangelo than I do. Some of you maybe not so well versed. So for those of you who know a lot, please be forgiving if some of the things I point out are rather obvious. So as I've mentioned, 600 drawings for the majority of Michelangelo scholars. There are some scholars who say 600 is way too many. And we know that there are stories, we know for a fact that Michelangelo ordered at the end of his life in 1564 drawings from his Roman studio to be burnt. That's drawings from the last 30 years of Michelangelo's life, from 1534 to 1564 when he dies, age 88. And so people would say, well, there can't be any drawings from Michelangelo's Roman studio because they're all burned. But here, I mean, there's this extraordinary odd fact about Michelangelo's scholarship is the Michelangelo scholars who deny, who want to drastically reduce the numbers, only look at the figurative drawings. They really leave the architectural drawings out of it. Well, here in the show are 2 marvelous architectural drawings which undoubtedly were in that Roman studio because they relate to Roman architectural projects. So the ground plan of San Giovanni dei Fiorentini, and on the right, an even later drawing from the early 1560s of the door of the Porta Pia. So, how come these survived? And it's difficult to answer that, except I think of all stories about when people die and things disappearing, Aunt Helen's gold, diamond necklace went missing. We don't know where it is, and you find your cousin's wife wearing it. There are lots of stories at the end of people's lives which should be taken with a measure of care. But it's undoubtedly true that the period, the last 30 years of Michelangelo's life in terms of drawings, the coverage is very uneven. There are lots of drawings that are missing. While the period that he's best represented is those years from 1516 to 1534 when he's in Florence, because Michelangelo, true to his bourgeois Florentine background, both stored letters and stored drawings. And he was in Florence, and his patrons, the Medici popes, Clement VII and Leo X, were in Rome. And there was a traffic of letters and drawings between Florence and Rome, and those were filed away in the family archive, which in the 19th century became the Casa Buonarroti. So there are more drawings from that period than any other. And let's just drill down a bit into that 600 sheets. And when I say sheets, I mean if a drawing is drawn on both sides, it doesn't count as two drawings, it's just one drawing. And if we think of the length of time that Michelangelo is actually working, the first record we have of him as an artist is in 1487 at the age of 12, when he picks up a payment for his master, Domenico Ghirlandaio. And we know that he was drawing right until the end of his life at 88. So that is a 77-year lifespan, and he's drawing a lot. And we have just 600 drawings. So if you divide that between those 77 years, you come to a measly eight drawings a year. And that compares very badly if you think of Raphael, who had a much shorter career, dies in his 30s. He leaves 450 drawings. Leonardo, again, a much shorter career, there are 4,000 drawings. So 600 drawings really does represent a tip of the iceberg for Michelangelo. But why did he destroy his drawings? I mean, that is a big, big question, and we just don't know, because like many things in Michelangelo's life, he didn't tell us, even in his hundreds of letters. But Vasari, Giorgio Vasari, who writes two biographies of Michelangelo, one in 1550 and one in 1568 in the Lives of the Artist. In that second life, in 1568, he speculates that Michelangelo did not want us to see the labor that had gone into his finished works. And that may well be true. But there's another impulse within Michelangelo, and one that is very strongly expressed time and time again in his letters, and that is not to allow people to look at his drawings. Just reading one example of a letter that he writes to his father in 1511. When he is in Rome, his father is in Florence. He says, "I wrote to you that no one should touch my things or drawings or anything else. You have not given me an answer, so it appears you do not read my letters." And I think we have to keep that absolutely in mind when we're looking at Michelangelo's drawings, because it's very easy to assume that here are these works, they're hanging in lovely frames, they're in a public space, that these drawings were intended for us to be seen. And that, by and large, is not true. These works, for the most part, were intended only for Michelangelo and to be seen within that studio. And I think we must keep that in mind when we look at those drawings. So let's start with these two, which are two working studies, precisely the kind of drawings that Michelangelo would never want us to see. and yet here they are on the walls, and I'm very grateful that they survive. Because Michelangelo has a strategy, really, or a deliberate, it's his character that he does not like to share things with other artists. He has a morbid fear of other artists stealing his ideas, and it's expressed time and time again, and that's why he never can work with anybody. So very different from his great rival Raphael, who really wins out in the papal court. In the end, Leo X sends Michelangelo away to Florence because he just can't put up with him anymore. While Raphael, the courtly, urbane, courteous, does what he's told, Raphael sees that printmaking is a wonderful thing because he can both make an income from it and he can also get his name, his fame to be distributed through print. So here in the British is a sheet from the British Museum where Raphael is working out an idea for the Massacre of the Innocents, which then gets turned into this marvelous engraving by Marcantonio Raimondi. That is something that Michelangelo never, ever did. I mean, there are many prints made from Michelangelo's designs, but he never, ever collaborated with a printmaker. He worked on a different principle, which is to say no to everybody who wanted a drawing from him was going to make him actually his works more desired. And it worked extraordinarily well. But it was a very risky strategy. I mean, in the Renaissance, you didn't tend to say no to crowned heads of Europe, but Michelangelo did, because he was Michelangelo. So let's return to those two drawings. And there is the painting for which they're preparatory. So the one at the top right is a drawing from a male model, and I think is drawn from life. And it's one of the questions you have to ask yourself, and there's no answer, but you have to think, is Michelangelo drawing from a model or not? I think art historians tend to be very, very literal because we have not been drawing nudes from the age of 12, hour upon hour. I think a lot of times artists actually can think of models without seeing them in front of them. But I don't think that's the case for the red chalk figure. It has a sort of particularity about it. And it's a very early instance of Michelangelo's use of red chalk. Dates from about 1506, 1507. And the drawing below it is drawn in the most common medium for Michelangelo, which is a quill, pen, and ink. And the color of the ink now is brown, but originally when Michelangelo dipped his quill pen in the ink pot, it would have been black, but the iron oxides over the years have changed the color into this familiar sort of chocolatey brown Old Master color. And one of the things you have to do because of the nature of Michelangelo's drawings, and Old Masters generally, is that the sequence of working studies is often broken. And so when you look at a drawing, you have to think what came before it and what might have come after it. So if you notice, and let's just go with a bit more detail, you'll notice in the pen and brown ink drawing that Michelangelo has not studied the right leg of that male figure because he knows that the Virgin's hand is going to obscure it. So there's no point in making that drawing. He wants for us to see the genitals of Christ to show that the Christ child is a boy baby and as normal as the rest of us. But the left leg is going to be obscured. So that shows us that at some point before this drawing, Michelangelo had made a compositional study of all of these figures, so he understood exactly where the Virgin's hand was going to go. Now, that compositional drawing does not exist, and compositional drawings by Michelangelo are extraordinarily rare. And I just show you, this is the kind of drawing that it might have been. This is a study for a battle piece for a mural painting that he was painting at much the same period. You know, really kind of quite scratchy and improvised. and I suspect that when he'd made it, he probably threw it away because it didn't really have a use beyond for future compositions, whereas figure studies could always be used as a reserve of ideas to inspire further works. So there must have been a compositional drawing, but we just don't know where it hasn't survived. Now, Michelangelo's use of a male figure to study the head of the Virgin, I mean, you could think, oh, well, that's a sure sign of Michelangelo's gay nature. He is a gay artist. He looked for the male body as always was what he thought about, what he studied. That was what he used as the basis for all of his figures. Yet that was, in that case, I don't think it's anything to do with his sexuality. It's just normal Renaissance practice. So here is a drawing by his contemporary, Luca Signorelli, an artist that Michelangelo liked enough to actually lend money to, which is pretty astonishing because Michelangelo was extraordinarily tight with his money. But he lent him money in Rome. And here is an example of a drawing by Luca Signorelli of two workshop assistants posed in the studio for a massacre of the innocents. And the part of the mother begging the soldier not to strike her child is played by a man. And there are many, many examples of that. Renaissance painters and sculptor studios were places for men, not for female models. That comes in much later. I mean, obviously, if an artist had a wife or a daughter, they could be used. But as we know, that wasn't the case with Michelangelo. So let's turn to another drawing in the show and think about this public-private thing, whether these drawings were accessible for us. And I think this is another example of a drawing that was never intended for us to be seen, although it had a public face in the sense that this is one of many studies, I think one of 3 studies in the show for the facade of San Lorenzo. Now, as I've said before, Leo X sent Michelangelo away from the papal court in 1516. He later said in a letter that he just couldn't deal with Michelangelo's terribilità, his sort of, his difficult nature. He preferred Raphael, so Raphael sort of ruled the roost while Michelangelo was sent off back to his native Florence. And the project that he was going to work on was this enormously elaborate and costly one, which was to sheathe the outside of the Church of San Lorenzo, a church round the corner from the Medici Palace, a church that had been the center, the focus for Medici patronage for centuries. So this was very much Leo X expressing his Florentineness, expressing that I am a Medici and I'm going to benefit my home city. And as you see, the top right, it didn't get very far. It was just too lavish because Florence is not blessed with having marble quarries nearby. The marble had to be taken from Carrara, which is up in Liguria. It was enormously expensive to get things there. Michelangelo wouldn't work with anybody else. He insisted that he wanted to do everything himself pretty much. And the whole thing sort of ground to a halt in 1519. But there's this very beautiful a wooden model made to show Leo X the design. And this drawing is very close to it. But on the back of the drawing, sadly you can't see it in the show, but you have to believe me that it is there. On the back of that drawing is this drawing, which is presumably done at around the same moment. And it shows an angel holding up the figure of a dead pope, and that dead pope is Julius II. And this, again, is where drawings are so wonderful to give you a sense of the fact that Michelangelo always had so many projects on the go, because he has, well, fairly, I think, got the reputation of an artist who did not finish projects. And part of the reason for that was that each pope that came in sort of would say, well, now you're working for me, and forget what you've done in the past. And in this, the drawing on the verso is a drawing for this project that dogs Michelangelo for most of his life, and it's for the tomb of Julius II. And this is, he signs the contract for this in 1505, and the actual work finally gets finished in 1545 in a hugely compromised way. He signed the contract to have it a freestanding monument in St. Peter's. It was going to have 40 marble figures. It was going to have bronze reliefs. And of course, within a few years, Julius, in fact, had taken Michelangelo and said, paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. So even Julius had diverted him away from the main project. And Michelangelo had taken an enormous amount of money from the Della Rovere family for this commission. In fact, he doesn't come out very well out of it. And he was haunted throughout his life that the Della Rovere were going to sort of come after him for the money. And so this is a case where on one side of the drawing, he's working for the Medici. On the other side of the drawing, he's going back to that project for Julius II's tomb. And it shows him thinking about this. I'm sorry, the Metropolitan give you very, very bad downloads. So this is why you could blame the Met for this. But you'll have to take my word for it. This is an early drawing from the Metropolitan. And it shows angels holding up the dead figure of Julius II. And here is the tomb in San Pietro in Vincoli in Rome, and you can see a rather more conventional with Julius sort of propped up on his sarcophagus. So this is an example, one of the many examples where we can see how drawing opens up the idea that each one of Michelangelo's finished works is the product of hundreds and hundreds of drawings and decisions. And this is just one of those sort of evolutionary dead ends. It doesn't lead anywhere. He wants to just think about what this figure would look like from the side. And he works on it with this marvelously quick drawing, and then he leaves it, and it never goes anywhere. But I think we should just, for a moment, really admire what Michelangelo can do with just line. And I think it's always the quality that separates a good draftsman from the truly great draftsman, is the ability just with line alone. So you just have your quill pen, and the way that you can conjure up three-dimensional form, you can get this idea, the angel straining to hold on to that dead weight of Julius II. All of that is done by line. All of that is just done by tiny variations in pressure and by stopping the line at various points or taking it further. And another artist of that period who can do that, and Michelangelo certainly looked at very, very closely, is Leonardo. So there's a little drawing, literally sort of this big, in the British Museum of Leonardo, a woman with a unicorn. And another artist who can do it exactly this quality just with line, although Michelangelo would hate me for saying it, is Raphael. But you can see a very different way that they draw. I mean, Raphael is very much an artist who draws, thinks geometrically. The forms sort of come out of these circular sweeps of the pen, and then they sort of coalesce into figures. But he has got that ability with the line to give that sense of three-dimensional form. And Michelangelo famously said of Raphael, everything he has from me. Which wasn't true, but there's a degree of truth to it, because this figure here is actually taken from a marble tondo in the Royal Academy by Michelangelo. So, I mean, Raphael certainly did look at Michelangelo very, very carefully. And another thing that we can, I think, gain an understanding from looking at that dead Christ is something that Michelangelo wanted very much to bury, and that is his training. There's a letter in the show where he signs himself Michelangelo Scultore, and for much of his career, that's how he signs himself. But in fact, his only training was as a pittore, as a painter, and that was in the studio of Domenico and Davide Ghirlandaio in the mid-1480s. And Michelangelo didn't want the fact that he'd been in the Ghirland studio to be known. And so when Vasari wrote about it in the first Lives in 1550, it was one of many things that annoyed Michelangelo. So Michelangelo got a sort of authorized biography out, published in 1553 by his mouthpiece Condivi. And in Condivi's biography of Michelangelo, there is no mention of Ghirlandaio. Michelangelo sort of springs up, a kind of natural genius who needed nobody to teach him because he had it innate within him. But when you look at Ghirlandaio, this is a Ghirlandaio drawing, Domenico Ghirlandaio drawing from the mid-1480s, precisely when Michelangelo is in the studio. He's working in the Tornabuoni Chapel in Santa Maria Novella, somewhere where Michelangelo almost certainly actually worked, you know, doing what assistants do. He would have seen drawings like this. And this shorthand, this sort of very kind of notational shorthand of figures that Ghirlandaio uses, comes out very strongly in his shorthand for figures when he's drawing very quickly. So the drawings tell you that whatever Michelangelo said, he really did learn something from Ghirlandaio. And I think this drawing, which I have to say is sort of large but somewhat unlovely in the show, the best bits in it are the bits which look like Ghirlandaio. And these are these little drawings of scenes of the life of St. Lawrence when he's just drawing very quickly. The rest of the drawing, I think, is a bit dull because here we're shifting into another territory. We're moving from the private drawing into a public drawing because this drawing was probably intended, although I don't think it was actually ever sent, to be shown to Leo X to give Michelangelo's first ideas for San Lorenzo. And basically, his ideas at that point was that it should just be a sort of frame for all sorts of sculpture. But for whatever reason, I don't think it was sent. There's a rather beautiful black chalk. If you go down and look at the show, there's a black chalk figure here, which he never inked up. So it sort of suggests this drawing was never quite sent. But it is, in essence, a design for a public drawing. And it's one, it opens up this whole idea of drawings as a form of dialogue between artist and patron, which is very typical of these years of Michelangelo in Florence. But it is nothing new, the idea of drawing as a form of communication between artist and patron. Here, a drawing in the British Museum by the Ferrarese artist Tura, an artist you know because there's that wonderful picture in the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum close at hand. Now this, I think we can be fairly certain, is a drawing intended to be sent to be shown or sent to a patron. And the reason why I can say that is because unless you think that Tura suffered from some dementia of some kind, he's written horo, gold, horo, 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 horo. Clearly, the patron who he's sending this painting is somebody who likes gold. He wants a sort of painting with bling, and Tura is very, very keen to show him, this is my picture, and it's going to have a lot of gold in it. And that is why we know that this, this drawing is exactly that, a form of dialogue between artist and patron. And that is something that Michelangelo does a lot of because his patrons are in Rome, as I've said. He is working in Florence, they are in Rome, and particularly the project for San Lorenzo falls apart in 1519. Even Leo X, who spends money as if like no tomorrow, in the end realizes that it's never going to be done. And so San Lorenzo ends. And then Michelangelo is put on to other work in the church of a slightly smaller scale. And then when Leo X's cousin, Clement VII, is elected in 1524. Now, Clement is very different from Leo. Leo doesn't really understand Michelangelo, whereas Clement is a really wonderful patron for Michelangelo. They're at the same age. They've grown up together to a certain degree because Michelangelo, we know, was in the Medici Palace as a teenager when he leaves Ghirlandaio's studio and he comes to the Medici Gardens and joins the household of Clement's uncle, Lorenzo the Magnificent. And Clement really loves architecture. I mean, he's learned about architecture through the San Gallo family, and that's what he really likes doing. He's a terrible pope, but he's a wonderful architectural patron. And as things go really, really badly, to such an extent that he manages to enrage and be on the wrong side with the Holy Roman Empire, Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, who should be, the kind of protecting the papacy. It ends up that Clement so botches it that imperial troops actually sack and capture Clement in 1527. So the situation is just really, really bad. But the only relief from the political situation is the Lutherans in the north, imperial troops marching towards Rome, is these architectural drawings that Michelangelo sends to Clement. And they were writing to each other sometimes 2 or 3 times a week with Clement suggesting things. And this is an example of one of those drawings. And this is Clement saying for the new sacristy, the Medici Chapel, suggesting that wouldn't it be a good idea to have some stuccoed figures in the coffered ceiling. Now, I suspect that Michelangelo wasn't particularly keen on having stuccoed figures in his ceiling. He wanted you to look at, the tombs with day and night and dusk and dawn. He didn't want you sort of looking upwards. So, but, Clement is a pope after all. So he says that, he makes this drawing to show him what it might look like. But he does it with a sort of beautiful kind of laconic economy with just these beautiful loops of the wash to suggest the rosettes. And he only does one scene. And, I think when he's putting this lick of wash here, he's sort of going sort of yada yada, and more of the same. And indeed, Clement complains that he doesn't know how many figures Michelangelo would intend to have in the ceiling. But, surprise, surprise, this never actually gets built. But a more sort of chatty... am I going to be stuck on this for the rest? This could be... can we have the next one? Oh, there we go. So this is just to orientate yourself. So here is the new sacristy, and this is the Laurentian library, the library that's built by Michelangelo to house Lorenzo the Magnificent's wonderful collection of books and manuscripts. And this design here is an idea for this space at the end. It was called, the idea was that the most precious of Lorenzo the Magnificent's books were going to be kept in the little library, the Piccolo Libreria. And this is clearly a building that Michelangelo really wants to build, because it's this exciting triangular shape, which is caused due in part to the difficulty of the site. And he writes that, the drawing is a dialogue. He's giving Clement a nice scale there. But here he writes up here about the fact that the site, this side of the building, is constrained because of the house. And here you have to get the sense of Michelangelo's Florentine accent, because he writes C-H-A-S-A rather than C-A-S-A, rather than the casa. So he would be saying la casa, because Florentines say ho-ho-hola. And so you get Michelangelo's Tuscan accent there. And he's saying that here on this side is the house of Ilario Martelli. But on this side, you can do anything you like because this belongs to the priests. It's sort of, this is the neighbor from hell, but this, we can do whatever we like. And then he inscribes it beautifully. So he says here is a banco tondo, a circular desk. He's saying here that it's lit from above. So there's this wonderful sense of communication between a very sophisticated architect and a very sophisticated patron who understands precisely, and they're both sort of sparking each other off. And as an example of how sophisticated Clement is the third drawing of these sort of dialogue drawings, these public drawings between Michelangelo and Clement, is this design for, again, an unexecuted project to have the tombs of Clement and Leo X in the choir in the far end of San Lorenzo. And it's a mark of Michelangelo realizing that Clement really does know what he's talking about with architecture, that he puts the elevation and he puts the ground plan together. And he's also changing his mind, because that's what Michelangelo did. He's changing things up here as he's drawing, as ideas keep flooding through his head. But it's very, very different from this drawing, which is a design for slightly earlier on in his Florentine period for this area below the drum of Florence Cathedral. So, this is very suave and sophisticated. He's put wash to show you the elevation of the walls. In the other drawing, it's just for him, and you can see the difference. But you would think that Michelangelo, he's got this wonderful patron, who's giving him lots of money, things are going very well. You would think that he would stay loyal to him. He's really been brought up by the Medici. But the moment that Clement falls from power because of the sack of Rome in 1527, and the Medici are booted out of Florence, Michelangelo declares himself to be a Republican. And he really politically is a Republican. He's anti-Medici. And so what does he do? He gets involved in fortifying the city. Fortifying the city against the patron who he's just been working for. And there are two drawings in the show. There are many more in the Casa Buonarroti, but these are the two in the show. This is recto and verso. So all these wonderful kind of lines of fire that Michelangelo is imagining, these are lines of fire sort of into the Medici troops. But having said that, whether these fortifications ever get put up is unlikely. And the city actually falls and in 1530. And what does Clement do? Is he very furious and says, what the hell were you doing? No. He realizes that Michelangelo, okay, he's a Republican, but he's a great, great artist and and he's working for me. So he puts him back on the payroll and says, go back and work in the Medici Chapel again. I mean, he is the most amazing patron. Michelangelo, quite frankly, is not the most loyal of artists to him, but, that's politics, I suppose. But in 1532, so after the fall, Michelangelo goes back to Rome, and in order to renegotiate with the Della Roveres about the tomb, the sort of endless negotiation about money and what the new restricted form of the tomb should be. Anyway, while he is in Rome, he meets a young aristocratic nobleman called Tommaso de' Cavalieri, and he falls madly in love with him. So Michelangelo in his 50s, Tommaso is a young man, and this is the first time that Michelangelo has been in love, and it's a powerful sensation for him. And one of the expressions that he has towards the object of his love, Tommaso, is to give him drawings. And you have to think these drawings are these works that kings and bishops and cardinals all have longed and written to Michelangelo, please send me a drawing, and Michelangelo hasn't replied to his letters. So drawing was a way, as an expression for Michelangelo to say, you are in my most intimate circle, and I'm going to give you something that everybody else wants. And to such an extent that everybody else wants, that Tommaso, 30 years later, has to give up this drawing and send it to Duke Cosimo de' Medici in Florence. And there's this rather wonderful letter that Tommaso de' Cavalieri writes about giving up this drawing was like giving up one of his children. But that tells you something very interesting, I think, is the fact that Cosimo in Florence knows about this drawing in Rome. And this is a public, in a way a private drawing, but has a public face because they become so famous. And you might say it's quite a strange drawing to send as a token of affection. Cleopatra being bitten in, she's committing suicide here. But, Michelangelo didn't really run to romance much. His other drawings included the fall of Phaeton, the punishment of Titius. So Cleopatra was sort of one of the lighter ones. And his poetry is also full of this idea of love and suffering, because I think, he felt that love made him so vulnerable, that he'd opened himself up to Tommaso, and he feared what might happen. But in fact, Tommaso remained a loyal and true friend of Michelangelo and was there when Michelangelo died. Now, this drawing on the verso has been questioned by some, and people say, is it by the pupils? Well, I mean, my view is, for what it's worth, is that it absolutely is by Michelangelo, but it's Michelangelo in a very different form. So if we go back, so this is a kind of polished Michelangelo, but we know from Vasari that as part of this relationship, Michelangelo was teaching Tommaso how to draw. And maybe the fact that he's shown this very kind of impromptu, more relaxed drawing on the verso is a way of showing Tommaso, that the basis of that very polished drawing is this much sketchier drawing, and that you have to do this in order to get to the other more finished, more exquisite drawing. But I think, I think if you want to look at this beautiful bit of drawing here of the spiraling curl of her hair, just again by putting pressure on. I mean, that is not done by one of Michelangelo's, well, we'll come to them, very, very, very bad and clod-like assistants. But it is Michelangelo in a different mode. And I think it's another thing, and it's about opening himself up. I mean, on the left-hand side of the screen is this very beautiful drawing. Slightly earlier, we don't know who it's for, but it must again be a drawing for an intimate member of Michelangelo's circle. And on the back of that drawing is this drawing, and here you get, so this is Michelangelo, this is terrible assistant, this is, so this is a kind of drawing lesson. So these are all assistants. that's Michelangelo, and includes this drawing of a man, I don't know how, defecating, let me put it like that. So, to me, this drawing is also about, as part of entering into Michelangelo's intimate circle, he's willing to say, you can come into my studio and I will show you the kind of thing that we do. And that includes, bad drawings by students. And I think that drawing on the right is not a bad drawing by a student. It is just Michelangelo showing the sketchy side of his drawing practice because he felt that he could show that to somebody like Tommaso. Now, we've seen with the British Museum drawing those appalling examples of assistants. And if we look at the show, we can actually see that beneath a couple of the drawings, there are examples of those self-same assistants, because Michelangelo in Florence, for the first time, teaches pupils how to draw. So let's go, whoa. And so here, these legs here, that's not by Michelangelo. That's one of his assistants. And Michelangelo handpicks his assistants for their ineptitude. He cannot bear to have anybody around him who he thinks is going to steal ideas from him. So in order for that to avoid that, he chooses people who are just really, really bad. And so different from Raphael, who handpicks the very, very best young artists in Rome because he wants them to work for him and to be part of the studio. That is not Michelangelo. And so the suggestion ever, if you find a good drawing and somebody says, well, that might be an assistant, it's not. And here, in this marvelous drawing for an early idea for the staircase of the Ricchetto, these drawings here are definitely studio assistants. That, well, in the catalogue it said that is also studio assistant. I'm not so sure. I think that could well be by Michelangelo on a sort of quick, sketchy, but that's open to question. And this rather beautiful drapery study is, I think, Michelangelo. So you see these sort of layers. I mean, Michelangelo just, is drawing on top of them. He doesn't want to preserve them. So he uses it's just a bit of paper for him. And we have one name of one of those assistants, and that is Antonio Mini. And here, drawing the BM in this famous thing that he's written. So here he's drawing, he's drawing a Virgin and Child, and he says, draw, Antonio, draw, and don't waste time. And then Antonio duly does this, well, you can see it probably better here, this really very, very inept and awkward red chalk copy of Michelangelo's pen and ink drawing. So that's Antonio Mini for you. And here again is that drawing and so this is an earlier, all these staircase designs are early ideas for this staircase, but we have to remember this happens much later. The staircase is actually not built until 1559 when Michelangelo is returned to Rome. But, nevertheless, this is him sketching out ideas. And in fact, Clement tells him that he doesn't want a two-tier staircase. He wants a single tier staircase. And here he is sketching out ideas. But you get this, looking at this drawing, the multi-use of Michelangelo's drawing. So there's training his assistants how to draw on one level. Over that, he's drawn the pen and ink staircase. And then if we flip this drawing, you can see he's actually drawn out here a profile of one of the bases of one of these columns. So a bit of paper, because Michelangelo is incredibly mean with paper, is always often, well not always, often is being used in a variety of different ways. And just to end, I just want to share this. I came across this the other day, this quote from Kirchner. We have to look at drawings in the same way we read a letter from a close friend, and also pay attention to what is written between the lines. And on that note, I just want to end with just two things, which I hope will help you if you need help, which I'm sure you don't, to read between the lines in Michelangelo. Well, maybe this is just an expression of what I think is so powerful and wonderful about his drawings. And one of those ideas is Michelangelo as a narrative artist, and how brilliantly he uses the fact that his figures often do not look out at us, that they are withdrawn. Cleopatra, you know, there's this wonderful kind of horned serpent at her breast, but her head is turned. What is she thinking? Michelangelo is making us to think, because we can say he's making us think, because this is a drawing intended to be viewed. Is she wistful? Is she sad? Is she thinking, why did I fall in love with Mark Antony? The pain of love, etc., etc. We have to supply that. And I think that's a feature also of this drawing. This very large drawing may be made as a guide for one of Michelangelo's painting friends in Florence, where the figure of Christ is very finished, with pen and ink and red chalk and white heightening, and it's sort of almost like has a sort of marble sheen to it. But that's not the case with the Virgin. And in fact, originally, if you can just see here, there's the eye and there's a nose here. He originally had her looking down at the Christ child, but in the end, he has her looking away, one of many changes in this drawing. And I think you're meant to bring to this drawing the idea of that the Virgin cannot bear to look at her child, because she knows that as an adult, the Christ child will be cradled as a dead body on her lap. And so she's looking away because it's just too anguishing. And so that's the details of that drawing. And that's a feature also of this one of only two portrait drawings. This one's in the British Museum, of Andrea Quaratesi, sort of, in a way, a pre-runner to Tommaso de Cavalieri, this Florentine noble youth who Michelangelo fancies and teaches to draw. But this drawing, made in the late 1520s, does he show Andrea Quaratesi looking out towards us? No, he has him looking to the side. And you have to think of the times in which this was done. This is the siege of Florence, this, the city doomed. I think that's all in there in that drawing. And also this idea of an older man, a man in his 50s, looking at a beautiful young man and being aware that that transient beauty is going to fade and pass. All of that, I think, for me, is contained within, you might think he's just, somebody's walked in the door or something. But for me, there is that withdrawal, the not showing us what they're thinking. We have to supply it. And again, another drawing from the British Museum, just to sort of complete the circle, a drawing from the 1540s when he's back in Rome. And there, indeed, is the Virgin with the dead Christ on her lap, a drawing known as the Warwick Pietà, because the Earl of Warwick owned it. And again, the Virgin cannot bear, is shown not looking at Christ, exactly as in the Casa Buonarroti drawing. So I think it's that kind of, that sort of psychological depth that I think reading between the lines you can comes out very strongly in Michelangelo. He is a profoundly religious artist. He is an artist who fears deeply about the state of his soul. I mean, his religious poetry is some of the most sort of harrowing that you can read. And that is comes out enormously strongly in his drawings. And the last point is, I think, is the point about looking at his drawings and being aware of the change that Michelangelo, as he goes through his career as a draftsman, is more and more open to showing the transient state of his thoughts. That, okay, he leaves a drawing, but it's not finished. It's open-ended. So with the risen Christ, the upper body is more or less fixed, but the position of the legs, we have 4 or 5 different alternatives. Equally, with this drawing, you have the boy with the head here, the leg here, but he doesn't cover those up. They are visible, and so each drawing, in a way, can conjure up new avenues to explore. And you have to think that Michelangelo is an artist who really is concentrated on one thing, and that is the expressive body. And so he is able to, within that 77-year career, he's fixed on the body, and yet he can, by these nuances of an arm here, a head turned here, he can extract more meaning and more pathos, more emotion from it. And that is visible in his drawings because you see the changes. And again, here you're getting all sorts of changes in the position of the arms. And you have to, look at these drawings and see through those drawings to see those changes. And the greatest example of that in the show is this, the last drawing in the show, the design for Porta Pia. And he's using translucent, very thin lead white. So the drawings from the beginning of the process sort of come through. So all of those doorways are present within that sort of finished doorway. It's so deep. There are so many different nuances, different directions that you could go from that drawing. And I think that is present in his late religious drawings. This is a crucifixion study from the BM, where, if using exactly the same technique, the Virgin Mary is shown with her arms crossed across her body, a gesture familiar to you from an annunciation of acceptance, that she accepts her son is crucified, yet at the same time you see her arms are also outstretched in anguish and pain. Those two things are there at the same time. In the same way, the Porta Pia design, there are many, the planes, they move backwards and forwards in space, exactly like Michelangelo's architecture, this sort of planar play. And I think it's that, really, to look at the drawings and read between the lines, because I don't think there's an artist who, spending time with this, ever wasted. And with Michelangelo, the more you look, the more you get out of it. And I hope my ramblings over the last hour have brought a little bit more clarity into reading Michelangelo, his life, and understanding his drawings. Thank you. Now, I'm told that you're going to plumb the depth of my ignorance by asking me questions about Michelangelo. So perhaps you've had enough, quite sensibly. Does anybody have a question?
Does Michelangelo, do his drawings occur in other collections in the Vatican, for instance, or other governments?
Yeah, no, the great concentrations of Michelangelo's drawings are the Casa Buonarroti, which has got numerically the greatest number, which you'd expect because it's the family archive. And then the British Museum, because back in the 19th century, one of our trustees managed to buy an enormous amount of drawings from a member of the family. We don't ask too closely how these drawings escaped out of the family archives. And also drawings came out during the Napoleonic period. And the Ashmolean in Oxford has got great collections of Michelangelo. But that, the Metropolitan have got 2 or 3, and there are some, a couple more in America. So, they're not all in Britain and in Italy, but that's the main place. And the Vatican has got some, too. It's stunned you into silence.
Thank you. As you said, Jared, that Michelangelo was intimidated by other artists, and he always picked inept assistants. What's the point of having an assistant if they can't help you? Is he just there to mix the paint and prepare the plaster? What was their role?
Well, I think in different periods, yeah, that's a very good question. I mean, they certainly weren't there to train up and be as good as Michelangelo, that's for sure. I think, they were there to do sort of humble duties. And there were periods when Michelangelo does manage to work with other artists. I mean, during the Medici Chapel and in the Laurentian Library, the carvings are in the local stone, Pietra Serena, which, because it's not marble, Michelangelo is not interested in carving. So he's able to work with those stone carvers and say, here's a design for them, you get on with it. It's just that anybody sort of in his studio, in his intimate circle, he doesn't want them to be too good because, he fears they're going to take away all his ideas. I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, he's in an extraordinary mixture, and we've all, I think, come across these kinds of people in our lives who are unbelievably gifted and yet are so thin-skinned and vulnerable and fear competition. There are times when you read the letters and you just cannot believe that Michelangelo could have been so thin-skinned about some, young artist who he thinks is going to take over and become the greatest artist. I mean, it's just ridiculous. But that's, that was him. And so, Antonio Mini, for example, the artist who you saw, in the end, it goes off to France to work at the court of Francois I. But, he can't make a living, and he has to sell Michelangelo's drawings that he's been given. So, he doesn't choose artists until right at the end of his life. He manages actually to work with better quality artists who don't sort of challenge him. But generally, the assistants don't do much beyond sort of grinding colours and running errands, I suspect.
Yes, hi. I just wanted to address the idea of the deliberate sense of unfinish in his sculptures, that I kind of see a connection to those drawings that are not looking at us and that have that deep introspective and almost, soulful quality as part of his spiritual dilemmas, his spiritual struggle.
Well, it's a difficult one. I mean, I quite agree. I mean, they're some of his most amazing sculptures, but I don't suspect that at the time Michelangelo ever wanted, he wanted to finish them. The unfinished ones were,
Pietas at the end of the...
Yeah, well, that's a different, I agree. Probably the one sculpture that he knew he could never finish. I mean, what's so amazing about the late drawings, like the Porta Pia or the Crucifixion, is that if you work on a drawing, you sort of build up layers upon layers and layers, and you need lead white to kind of like a correcting fluid, and then you keep on drawing on top of it, so they become bigger and bigger, the forms. While in a marble sculpture, if you keep on working at a marble sculpture, it becomes like a sort of bar of soap you've left in the bath. But and I think. That's Michelangelo, both in a drawing and as a sculpting. I mean, he's sort of, it's art as a form of meditation and prayer, I think, really. These are a sort of dialogue between him and God, and that's why he's working. But before that, I suspect he would be rather, he didn't want them to be unfinished, he wanted them to be finished. We have to remember that the unfinished figures were in the of the slaves were in the Boboli Garden in a grotto. You know, they weren't regarded as really kind of serious, heavyweight Michelangelo works. I mean, they're wonderful, and we like them, but we have a different aesthetic. But I don't think Michelangelo himself really wanted them to be unfinished. If he'd have had, 10 more lifetimes, he would have been able to achieve it.
But what about the early St. Matthew emerging out of the stone that is deliberately, I think, left unfinished?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's difficult to know, deliberate or otherwise. But, I mean, maybe. I mean, the great thing with Michelangelo is, your guess is as good as mine, I think. But I think generally 16th century artists wanted to finish things. But, having said that, there's, an artist like, Titian embraces the idea of a very rough finish, and that's maybe also true of Michelangelo. But I don't suspect that's the case, at least for the slaves. But I may well be wrong.
Can you speak to whether or not he used silver point as a drafting medium?
I mean, I would be willing to bet that he did use silver point. I mean, in that it's a very Florentine technique. I mean, to explain, the silver point is a stick of silver that you work on a prepared ground. And Ghirlandaio was a wonderful silver point artist. And it was a very traditional, classic way of training your assistants to sort of think before they drew, because silver point can't be erased. But having said that, there is not a single drawing by Michelangelo in silver point. And I think as he becomes a mature artist, the kind of precision of silver point is not what he wants. But he does, he does very strange things. There are times when he draws in black chalk when every other artist would use pen and ink. But if you could find me a silver point drawing by Michelangelo, I would be very, very grateful. Look in your attic.
That's okay. That leads me into something that I think is related. Is there any instance where he did
etchings? No. Printmaking absolutely was a no-no with Michelangelo. I mean, etching actually comes he could have done it. It was during his period. Artists like Parmigianino and Schiavone made etchings. But no, Michelangelo, not, it's that, by the very nature of print is disseminated and goes out. Michelangelo's whole shtick was, keep it close and people are going to want it more. And that worked very well for him. So no, sadly, again, but if you find a Michelangelo etching, that would be great, but I think unlikely.
Okay, we have one more question.
Curious from an architectural viewpoint, actually, the sophisticated dialogue that you described with Clement VII, whether any people have studied whether it really improved or limited what Michelangelo was creating. If you look at the drawings, there are 3 different studies in the exhibit of the potential facade for San Lorenzo. It's the first study that's the most inventive architecturally. And was that sort of a constraint on him over the times he interacted with Clement?
I'll stand up for Clement. I think he was a great patron, and I think they actually did spark ideas off each other. And there are times, when Clement is pushing Michelangelo in various directions, particularly of the Laurentian Library, which I think is his most inventive building. I think, that's it's not fair to say it's as much as Clement's building as Michelangelo. But I think it was a really creative relationship because Clement really did understand architecture. He kind of, and so he's pushing Michelangelo, particularly in the vestibule, to do exciting things, to make it different. So, it's difficult to know with San Lorenzo because, it never gets built. And I don't think even Michelangelo at a certain point must have realized it was never going to be built because, just the sheer labor of getting the marble to Florence would have, it's about 40 years worth of labor. But I don't, Leo's not a great, wasn't a very inspiring patron for Michelangelo, but Clement really was. So I'll stick up for Clement. I think, they worked very well together as a team. But as I've said, that didn't stop Michelangelo saying, Yabu sucks, the Medici and the Florentine Republic. But, that's politics, I suppose.
Thank you so much for a wonderful evening. Thank you for coming.